This unstoppable fireball juggernaut of a talent whose name is Sashwat Sachdeva. He's going to go down in history as one of the greats and he's just getting started. Mark kar lo isko.
Now that we know how Dhurandhar Part 2 The Revenge ended, did you catch how the soundtrack was secretly telling us this story the whole time?
पाकिस्तान का मुस्तकबिल अब हिंदुस्तान तय करेगा.
Dhurandhar Part 2 is breaking records left and right, and frankly, it would be unfair not to talk about the musical part of the movie. In my recent spoiler and non-spoiler reviews of Dhurandhar Part 2, I intentionally held back on this topic because it deserved its own dedicated breakdown. When you compare the tracks from Part 1 directly with Part 2, the contrast is massive. Part 1 had a mix of inspirational and party-type songs. Part 2 has songs that mix emotions and rage, and that shift is entirely deliberate.
घायल हूं, इसलिए घातक हूं.
In a cinematic blockbuster like this, the music isn't just playing in the background to set a mood. It is an active storytelling tool. And in this video, from the title track to Rasputin, I will go over some songs from both Part 1 and Part 2 of Dhurandhar to uncover the hidden subtext in Aditya Dhar's writing.
रहमान डकैत की दी हुई मौत बड़ी कसाईनुमा होती है.
Now, full disclosure, I don't analyze music a way a trained musician does. To me, music is a universal language. If the beats are good, if the vibe is right and it carries real emotion, I don't care where the music is from. I do, however, love to follow the lyrics because more often than not, they serve as the hidden subtext in the screenplay. For convenience, I have divided the breakdown into two categories, original songs and pop culture, as well as a separate chapter on the independent music aspect of Dhurandhar.
ये नया हिंदुस्तान है. ये घर में घुसेगा भी और मारेगा भी.
Before each song, I will pose a question and hope to answer that with an explanation. But before we dive deep into the breakdown, did you know that long before Aditya Dhar was directing massive cinematic blockbusters, he was actually shaping stories entirely through his lyrics? A lot of people forget or maybe don't know that Aditya Dhar began his journey in the industry as a lyricist in movies like Kabul Express, Hale Dil and Daddy Cool. The song Kabul Fizza from Kabul Express is one of my favorites from his discography. That kind of background gives a filmmaker a very specific skill set. It is widely accepted that directors with a strong musical sense have a better understanding of how the story will unfold on the screen.
I can't imagine myself without music. Even I can't write a scene without music and sound at least.
In the case of Aditya Dhar, when you start out writing lyrics, you learn the rhythm of storytelling in its most concentrated form. You quickly realize that a song isn't just a break from the movie or a promotional tool to play on the radio. It is a direct extension of the screenplay. Because of this foundational skill, Aditya has an instinct for what a script actually needs musically, something that even Sashwat Sachdeva acknowledged in a recent interview.
Actually, he's also not just a great writer, he's also a very, very good dialogue writer. So they are so inspiring that they're telling you a story. I think that does most of the talking. It tells you what it wants, you know.
The reason I started with this discussion was to set a baseline for why the lyrics, sound and music feel so relatable to the story. Even though Ishaq Kamil wrote the lyrics for Dhurandhar, given how sacred Aditya's scripts are, he would have played a key role in shaping the final versions.
You're goddamn right.
With that, let's move on to the first category, original songs. How exactly does a single track bridge the gap between a death row inmate from Punjab and a ruthless, covert spy in the underworld of Aari Aari? Let's kick off the original songs category with the title track itself, Dhurandhar. On the surface, it sounds like an absolute hype track designed to elevate the high-octane action. But when you peel back the layers and map the lyrics against Jaskirat's journey, it becomes a lyrical summary of his entire tragic existence. The hook of the song heavily features the Punjabi lines, Na de dil pardesi nu, tenu nit da rona pe jaunga. This essentially translates to a warning. Do not give your heart to an outsider or a wanderer because it will only bring you daily tears. This acts as a massive double-edged sword for our protagonist. During his mission in Pakistan as Hamza, he is the ultimate Pardesi. He is a ghost infiltrating the underworld, and anyone who builds trust with him is ultimately doomed. But more heartbreakingly, this foreshadows the film's ending. When Jaskirat finally returns to India, he realizes he has become a stranger to his own family. The very nature of his covert life means he cannot have attachments and he is condemned to be a wanderer forever. Then the English rap kicks in. The lines say, "Father, forgive me. I can forgive them. You know my history. You know what I did then," are a straight reflection of Jaskirat's past. Before he was ever an asset for Indian intelligence, he was on death row for slaughtering the men who killed his father and sister. The lyric, "They call me a bad man, that's a good thing," perfectly captures intelligence chief Ajay Sanyal's reasoning for recruiting him. To survive the Lyari underworld and take down targets like Rahman Dakhet and Major Iqbal, they needed someone already comfortable in the dark. Finally, the track hammers home the phrase, "Heavy is the head, it's a blessing and a curse." This is the ultimate spoiler for the film's climax. The blessing is his absolute lethal efficiency. He completes his revenge and dismantles the terror network of Pakistan. The curse is the personal, isolating cost of that victory. By the time he finishes his mission, his familial ties are completely severed. The song told us from the opening credits that his success as a spy would ultimately cost him the only life he ever wanted to return to. This track seamlessly blends the folk tragedy of his Punjabi roots with the aggressive, unapologetic hip-hop of his violent mission.
तुम्हारा उद्देश्य सिर्फ पाकिस्तान में घुसना नहीं है, पूरे जंगल पे राज करना है.
What kind of mindset does a man need to possess to walk across the Afghan border into a country where his very existence is a death sentence? This brings us directly to our next track, Ishq Jalakar, which plays exactly when Ranveer Singh's character Hamza enters Pakistan. If the title track was about the violent history, this song is about his emotional state at the exact moment he crosses the point of no return. The recurring phrase in the chorus translates to him saying his heart is broken and he has arrived after burning away all of his love. This is Aditya Dhar feeding us the subtext of the mission. Jaskirat is leaving his identity behind to become Hamza. He has already lost his father and sister to violence, and now, to survive as a spy in the Lyari underworld, he has to sever himself from any lingering human attachment completely. He is literally burning his capacity to love so it cannot be used against him, which was shown in the scene when Jaskirat burns the only photo he has of his family. Then the lyrics emphasize that he is not looking for a caravan or a companion. It is the ultimate lone wolf, stepping into hostile territory without an army and without a safety net. When the song declares that he has arrived like a storm, it beautifully foreshadows the absolute destruction he will rain down on figures like Rahman Dakhet and Major Iqbal. It is a beautiful piece of music. The use of classical Indian sargam notes combined with the gritty, dangerous reality of a covert border crossing creates a brilliant emotional contrast. The lyrics mention that even if the sunlight breaks like glass and pierces him, he will deal with it. It suggests that Hamza is entirely numb to the pain. That numbness makes him the absolute perfect weapon for Indian intelligence, but it also silently guarantees the tragic, isolated fate waiting for him at the very end of his mission.
ये खेल हम जीतने के लिए खेल रहे हैं, और इस खेल में जीतने के लिए सबसे जरूरी है हमारा जिंदा रहना.
What happens when a covert spy stops hiding in the shadows and finally decides to burn the whole house down? Moving into the original songs from part 2, we hit a massive tonal shift with Aari Aari. In part 1, Hamza was infiltrating. He was quiet, calculating and focused on survival while building trust in the Lyari underworld. But part 2 is titled The Revenge, and this song serves as the ultimate anthem for a predator who has finally cornered his prey. Look at the opening Punjabi lines warning that clouds will gather and rain when two paths finally meet, the paths of Jaskirat and Hamza. The lyrics declare that his authority and pride are now completely visible. The song literally warns the enemy that the wind has changed direction and they need to watch their heads. The storm he brought with him in part 1 is finally breaking. But the absolute genius of this track is how it bridges his rural Punjabi roots with his ruthless current reality through that hard-hitting English rap verse. When the lyrics hit the line, "My father raised me a winner, if I kill for my people, it don't make me a sinner," we are getting a direct look into Jaskirat's moral compass. He is actively justifying the immense amount of blood on his hands. Whether he is avenging the murder of his father and sister or dismantling a terror network for his country, he does not view himself as a monster. To him, the violence is a necessary duty. Yet, amidst all this swagger and aggression, there is a deep underlying tragedy hidden in the chorus. The traditional folk lines about how the gamble of the heart has taken away his whole life perfectly encapsulate the film's bittersweet ending. He gave his entire existence to this mission and to his nation. He proudly declares that the world became his enemy while testing his devotion, and he gladly paid the price. He successfully executed the mission, but the true cost was his own future. He won the war for everyone else, but as the song hints, that devotion stripped away his chance at a normal life. What breaks a man more than taking a life for the people he loves or walking away from them forever? This brings us to Dil Pe Zakhm Khate Hain, a track that Aditya Dhar uses as the ultimate emotional bookend for his story. This song plays at two very specific, crushing moments in the film, and understanding both placements reveals the true tragedy of Jaskirat. The first time we hear it, he is heading back to his village, carrying the weapons he will use to avenge his murdered father and sister. The lyrics talk about taking wounds to the heart and putting your life on the line, simply stating that the only crime is loving them. In this context, the song is about the heavy burden of vengeance. Jaskirat is willingly destroying his own soul and future simply because he loved his family too much to let their killers live. In the scene where Pinda and Jaskirat hug each other, the latter says that in this life, his duty is to his family. Maybe, if God wills, his next could be for the country. But the absolute brilliance of this track shines when it returns at the very end of the film. Hamza is boarding the private jet back to India. His mission is a complete success, but the cost is absolute. He knows he can never see his wife Yelena and his son Zion ever again. Suddenly, those same lyrics take on a completely different, devastating meaning. The lines describing how trust in love increases even when someone passes by like a stranger perfectly mirror his new reality. He has to become a total ghost to his own child and the woman he loves to keep them safe from the fallout of his mission. By using this specific track at both the beginning of his violent journey and at the very end of his mission, the director is quietly telling us that Hamza never really escaped his cycle of loss. His deep capacity to love was his only crime, and it doomed him to a life of complete isolation.
हमारे पेशे में सबसे घातक औजार है नजर और सब्र दोनों की धार हमेशा तेज रखना.
How do you walk away from the very people you burned the world down to protect? This brings us to the final emotional gut punch of the original songs category, Phir Se, brought to life by Arijit Singh's melancholic brilliance. This track plays at the climax of Jaskirat's journey, right when he finally makes it back home. The mission is over, the targets are eliminated, and he survived. But as he stands there, watching his mother and sister living a happy, peaceful life, he makes the most heartbreaking decision of the entire film. He chooses not to walk through that door. When you break down the lyrics, they hit you right in the chest. The lines, "Samjhe the hum, gam hai khatam," meaning I thought the pain was over, perfectly capture his internal state. Jaskirat spent the entire movie fighting, surviving and executing his revenge in Pakistan, believing that once the dust settled, he would finally find peace. But then the song counters with "Dil hi hai mane na phir se," showing that the heart doesn't agree. The tears return because the tragic irony of his existence crushes him. He fought to secure their safety, but to keep that peace intact, he has to erase himself from their lives completely. He can't bring his blood-stained hands and the dangerous shadow of his covert life into their haven. The song heavily emphasizes this inescapable isolation. The lyrics talk about how loneliness was the only thing that troubled him deeply and how the shadow of their memories was his only partner on his dark path. That was his reality in Aari, but now, even standing just steps away from his family, he realizes that loneliness is a permanent sentence. Arijit Singh's voice carries the immense weight of a man accepting that his ultimate reward for serving his country is to remain a ghost forever. It is a devastating, beautiful conclusion to his arc, showing that the deepest cuts he suffered weren't physical but emotional. Why are modern blockbusters suddenly obsessed with dropping nostalgic pop anthems right in the middle of a gritty narrative? Moving away from the original compositions, we are stepping into the second category of our breakdown, pop culture songs. Integrating well-known tracks into movies has become a global trend, and there is a very good reason for it. When you take a familiar, nostalgic beat and place it over a high-stakes, intense scene, it grounds the action and gives the audience an immediate emotional anchor. Here is Quentin Tarantino explaining it.
Now it's very normal is to have modern pop songs in your films, and not only are they in them, like you kind of cut the scenes to them.
And composer Sashwat Sachdeva has done an absolutely fabulous job leveraging this trend for Dhurandhar. He didn't just pick obvious hits, he curated a deeply textured, cross-cultural playlist that perfectly matches the story's geography and era. Throughout the film, we are treated to a brilliant mix of 90s Bollywood nostalgia with tracks like Oye Oye from Tridev, Tamma Tamma from Thanedar, Hassan Jahangir's Hawa Hawa, and Hum Pyar Karne Wale from Dil. Then he seamlessly shifts the geography by bringing in Middle Eastern classics including Fliparachi and the iconic Didi track. And not to forget the theme from Knight Rider. Not this one, this one. But the biggest flex for the entire soundtrack, hands down, was how they managed to blend Boney M's Rasputin into the final chapter of the movie. For those who might not know, the copyright for Rasputin is notoriously difficult to clear. It is so tightly guarded and expensive that even massive Hollywood studios struggle to afford it. the fact that the makers secured it and used it so effectively is mind-blowing. To keep this discussion from turning into a 3-hour documentary, I'm going to focus on just 2 specific pop culture tracks that had the biggest impact on the story. How does a classic romantic qawwali perfectly describe the suffocating reality of a modern-day spy? The first one is the track Move from Part 1, featuring Sonu Nigam in the recreation of the iconic Ye Ishq Ishq Hai from Barsat Ki Raat. If you listen to it casually, it sounds like a song about extreme, tragic romance, but when you overlay these exact lyrics onto Hamza's journey in the Lyari underworld, the meaning flips completely. The ishq or love being talked about here is not for a person. It is his absolute uncompromising devotion to his mission and his country. Take the opening lines. नाज़ो अंदाज़ से कहते हैं कि जीना होगा, जहर भी देते हैं तो कहते हैं कि पीना होगा. This perfectly describes the exact relationship between a covert operative and his handlers. The intelligence agency is essentially handing Hamza a suicide mission, which is the poison, and yet they are telling him he has to drink it and somehow survive. The lyrics continue by saying that when he drinks it, they complain he does not die, but when he is on the verge of death, they command him to live. It captures the exhausting, impossible demands placed on a spy who is treated as an expendable asset but is required to be invincible. But the hardest hitting part comes right at the end. वो हंस के अगर मांगे तो हम जान भी दे दें, ये जान तो क्या चीज़ है, ईमान भी दे दें. They will ask with a smile, I would give my life. But what is a life? I would even give up my faith. This is the literal definition of a deep cover espionage. Jaskirat Singh Rangi did not just give up his life and his family, he completely surrendered his identity and his faith to become someone else in enemy territory. Aditya Dhar set a tragic lover's song to show the soldiers' tragic, self-destructive loyalty. How do you completely humiliate one of the most powerful men in a country using a 1970s disco track? Boney M's Rasputin in Dhurandhar Part 2 was a huge surprise, and the scene where it was placed was even more surprising. To really appreciate the absolute genius of this placement, you have to look at the tension of the scene. The ISI has captured Hamza. He's being brutally tortured for information, and the Director General of the ISI, played by Raj Sushri, is watching the whole thing, acting like an untouchable god. Then Indian intelligence director Ajay Sanyal calls him and casually asks for Hamza's release. When the general arrogantly refuses, Ajay tells him a little story about a senior ISI officer selling highly confidential secrets to Israel. He then sends the video proof right to the general's phone, revealing that the traitor is the general himself. Right as this massive, terrifying official realizes he is being blackmailed and his life is effectively over, the track Rasputin starts playing. So why play a funky European disco song over a tense espionage blackmail scene? It all comes down to the subtext of who Rasputin actually was. Historically and in the song's lyrics, Rasputin was a man who wormed his way into the highest levels of the Russian Empire. He was corrupt, lived a highly scandalous double life, and believed his proximity to power made him completely invincible. But his own greed and secret life eventually led to his brutal downfall. When Ajay Sanyal drops those videos, he's essentially telling the Director General that he is the same thing. The general portrays himself as a righteous, untouchable patriot defending his country from an Indian spy. But behind closed doors, he is a corrupt traitor selling out his own nation for personal gain. He is the modern-day Rasputin of his agency. Dropping this upbeat, incredibly catchy track right at the exact moment the villain's ego is completely shattered is peak dark comedy by Aditya Dhar. It completely strips the general of his authority and reduces his massive treason to a literal punchline. The music is not just scoring the scene here, it is actively mocking the villain to his face.
We must infiltrate the very core of Pakistan, ताकि वो भारत के खिलाफ अगर नींद में भी सोचे ना, तो उनके ख्वाब में भी हम बैठे नजर आने चाहिए.
Have you ever wondered why the soundtrack of Dhurandhar feels so refreshingly different from the usual factory-produced albums we hear today? That brings us to the final chapter of this breakdown, and it is honestly one of the most important decisions the filmmakers made, the heavy reliance on independent music. In a massive blockbuster with this kind of budget, the safe bet is always to hire the top 5 mainstream playback singers, produce 5 guaranteed radio hits, and call it a day. But Aditya Dhar and his musical team did the exact opposite. They went out and actively sourced independent artists, underground rappers, and folk singers who do not typically sit in highly polished Mumbai recording studios. By tapping into the indie music scene, they completely blew the doors of the traditional soundscape. This single decision brought an incredible amount of diversity to the lyrics and the movie's overall sound. Independent artists bring a certain rawness to their craft. They write about real pain, street culture, and unfiltered emotions. Exactly what a gritty espionage thriller needed. If Hamza's journey were backed by overly sanitized, perfectly auto-tuned vocals, the entire movie would have lost its edge. It proves that when a director trusts raw, independent talent over established commercial names, the movie's soul becomes unique. And that wraps up my deep dive into the musical storytelling of Dhurandhar. My favorite tracks other than the ones I mentioned in the video are Wari Jawa, Gehra Hua and Lut Le Gaya. But I would love to hear which track is your absolute favorite in the comments below. Please subscribe to this channel for more such videos and check out our video about the Khans in the new generation in Bollywood right here. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.